Okay, the next thing that makes the difference between people who heal and those who don't is focus on present time instead of focusing on the past. So you may have heard a well-meaning but misguided therapist say, you need to talk about what happened to heal it. I've heard many trauma survivors express fear of the pain in talking through the healing process, especially when talking about it is the therapist's suggestion, but not necessarily your choice. Don't get me wrong, if you were forced to keep secrets, then telling the secrets can be liberating and really help you break free from the shame that secrets create. But that has to be your choice. And talking about the details of trauma brings back a flood of pain held in the body, new triggers, more flashbacks, and too many nightmares. You already know that. And you already know that you've spent way too much time in fear already. Talking about it reinforces it. Talking about it strengthens the triggers. Talking about it brings a flood of feelings and body sensations that can be so overwhelming that you just want to give up. Talking about it helps the therapist to have something to talk about more than it helps you heal from talking. Can I make a confession here? When I first became a therapist, I thought getting people to talk about the details of their trauma was what would help me help them heal. I was wrong. What happened was my clients did tell me the details of the trauma. After all, I was the therapist. I had the authority to tell them what would work. But like many misguided therapists, I thought that getting it out was enough to help people heal. What actually happened is my clients came back to our next meeting in more pain than they were in before they told me the story. And on top of that, they demanded to know, what do I do about this pain? To tell you the truth, I didn't know. I was asking, what do you think you need to do? Or how do you feel about that? But that wasn't cutting it, for sure. I very quickly realized that I was asking for details so that I could reframe their experience to get them to think about what happened to them differently. In essence, the skill that I'd learned in school was to do something to my clients that would cause them to heal. I also very quickly realized that this doing something to survivors of trauma to help them heal actually often reenacts the dynamics of abuse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. More on that in just a minute. What I came to understand is that talking about the details isn't the fix. In fact, most of the people who've self-healed using this breakthrough method never have to verbalize any details or specifics of what happened to them. And this isn't any weird new variation of an eye movement technique of self-hypnosis or meditation. It's much more practical than that.
Remember yesterday when I told you about the categories of triggers? Remember how my fear of my grandmother's dog led to a fear of all dogs because they all fit into the broad category of willing to eat me in my protective brain? Well, when you talk about your trauma in therapy, it usually happens like this. You show up at a therapy appointment and tell your therapist that you were recently triggered. Your therapist then asked you what happened and what the trigger reminds you of. You tell the therapist what happened recently and say that it reminds you of something that happened to you while you were a kid. The therapist then asks you to tell the story about what happened when you were a kid and asks for details so they can weed out what's really bothering you. Then, noticing your anxiety, the therapist will offer you a breathing or relaxation technique to help you realize that you're safe. Now, in the therapist's mind, the therapist has done their job. I know I'm simplifying this just a bit, but the real truth about therapists' belief is that they believe that talking about it is enough. It's what you will need to heal, especially if you practice your breathing and relaxation techniques like they've instructed you to do. Talking about it is a form of exposure therapy. The belief is that the more you're exposed to the trauma while calming yourself down, the more likely you will overcome your fear. But if we reference the bear and how we talked about it yesterday, it actually goes something like this. When you were small, an angry brown bear chased you out of your home. You described this whole situation to your therapist, who concludes that it was the seeing of the bear that triggered you because it was a bear who chased you when you were little. Maybe your therapist even helps you realize that there are no bears that will get you now. After all, you're not little anymore. You live in a different area. You have more power and strength to protect yourself than you did then. But you need more than that. You told the whole story, and your brain doesn't know the difference between telling and experiencing. So your brain has stored all of the minute details of what happened, and now it's going to bring them all back to you. So you really leave the session with multiple triggers activated from telling the story. Your brain is replaying the feeling of exposure to dangerous anger because it was an angry bear. Your brain is reminding you of exactly what it was like being chased because the bear chased you. Your brain is telling you that bears could get you again. And your brain is bringing back all of the little details of the day that led up to the bear chasing you and all of the little details about what happened afterwards. So multiple danger categories were activated because you told all of the details from the past. Your therapist focused on the bear alone. Your body brings back everything. So focusing on the past and all of the details is what is causing you to be so greatly triggered as you leave the therapist's office. Maybe you started to feel a little more calm and relaxed before you left the office because you did some breathing and you described the objects around the therapist's office. But breathing and grounding don't stop your brain from playing out the scenarios from all of the different categories that activated in your brain's warning system when you told that whole story. And all of that is it's too much to deal with. As I've said before, with the trauma erase method, you stay in the present moment and you don't tell the story. To illustrate how this works, let me use an example that I've already shared a little bit with you. I was a sickly child with an angry, abusive parent. I was often treated badly for sleeping in on Saturday mornings past the time that my parent really thought I should be up and cleaning the house. So that's enough of the story for context. On the day that my sweetheart brought me a glass of warm lemon water while I was still in bed, I got triggered. If I'd brought that story to a therapist about being triggered while I was in bed, I would have been encouraged to talk about all of the dynamics that existed around having been sickly, having developed a lack of trust in my parent from early on, fear of breaking my mom's rule about staying in bed when I should be helping, feeling guilty for reading in bed in the morning, and never having been allowed to take care of my own needs. Instead, my body history pointed to the exact problem. It was, my sweetheart broke the rule. He did something loving for me even though I was being quote unquote lazy in bed, and that's what caused me to be triggered. But talking about all of that through, all of the dynamics of the reason why I was triggered through several therapy sessions would be such a waste of time and money because I already know the stories. Using the trauma erase method, I was able to instantly identify that I was triggered by a loving act based on my belief from the stories in my body history that I don't deserve that kind of attentive and loving gesture, especially if I'm being lazy. So it's the belief that's encased in your body history that you shift using the trauma erase method, so that your trauma brain recognizes that this situation doesn't fit the broad category that was captured by the radar of your brain's safety warning system. This belief, as well as all beliefs about bears of any color, about situations where you encounter your own anger or that of someone else, beliefs about why a dog would bite you, that you don't deserve love, or any other triggering circumstance, that's all you need to know in order to make the trauma erase method work. You just have to pay attention to the belief that initiates the trigger of fear in your brain. That is something you capture in the moment. It doesn't require any digging up of the past. When you get triggered in the here and now, your brain tells you exactly why by pointing out the category that the current circumstance relates to from the past. And when you focus on that, you already have all of the details you need. There's no need to tell the story to someone else. So in the previous example I gave you about seeing a bear, it's feasible to realize that since you were chased by an angry bear as a child, that when you saw the bear today, your trauma brain warned you, there's a bear, bears eat me. That's all you need to know. Because now you have everything you need to be able to shift a triggered but safe situation into a healing opportunity. Just like I did when I healed the trigger related to receiving love while I lingered too long in bed.
Here's the thing. You don't need to talk about what happened in the past because the past intrudes into your daily life on the regular. Am I right? It's those intrusions that you focus on using this method. It's that focus that gives you the mastery over them instead of having them, the triggers, overwhelm you. It's how you systematically eliminate them once and for all. Once you've come to understand and tap into your body's natural self-healing process, the only things you need to pay attention to with regard to your past are those daily intrusions, how they interrupt in the here and now. That's all. You see, triggers are invitations sent by your body to help you heal. Let me put it in a different way. Trauma happens in relationships and in the regular routines of daily living. Once you know you're safe, triggers offer you healing opportunities that are unique to you and will allow you to focus on one at a time, to heal one at a time, and progressively feel safer and safer in your daily life. This is exactly the opposite of the avalanche of triggers that pile on after you discuss the details of an entire event with your therapist. You get to focus on little pieces as they pop up. The chunks are much smaller and they're much more manageable. And it's much easier to develop a plan to manage those small chunks than it is to try to get yourself unfrozen after being flooded with multiple triggers because you told more details than you felt ready to reveal. You already know that doing instead of talking is so much more effective. You've asked the question yourself, what do I do? Here's what you do. You focus on one trigger at a time. That helps you to develop a specific action plan that consistently and reliably eliminates that trigger so that it never bothers you in the same way again. Period. I already know that seems far too good to be true. And if it is true, why hasn't anyone told you about it before? Look, the sad fact is that it takes 17 years for new information to spread across the field of mental health. Bessel van der Kolk said himself that after 30 years of research, we still don't have the answers. Think about this. The first ever landmark study that helped us understand the impact of trauma on development in children wasn't even published until 1990. Add 17 years to that to allow the information to be widely available and used in treatment, and you're already in 2007. So it's likely that there was no way that that study could have helped a therapist to help you with your trauma unless that therapist specifically sought out information from that study. But most therapists would never seek out a study like that. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's true. Let me tell you why. Therapists, most of them, don't seek out information unless it's attached to something called continuing education credits that they have to get every 2 years to maintain their license to practice therapy. So for many therapists, if it isn't attached to credits toward their continuing education, it doesn't get attention. And that study didn't have any attached credits, so it didn't get much attention from therapists sitting in their private practice offices. What does get attention are something called evidence-based practices, which do have CEUs attached. Evidence-based practices just means that there's been research to show that a particular way of doing something works for people who participated in those research studies. Research studies which Bessel van der Kolk said are 30 years old. So, you shouldn't feel bad about never having heard that triggers can be completely erased once and for all. The field is young and word doesn't get around very quickly. But now you know. There's also a difference between real life, lived experience and what can be learned in a research study or in school. My own real life experience and that of my clients shows that. I'll show you more about that in just a minute. For now, just let me say that I've seen it over and over again in my personal life and in the lives of every person who's used this method to completely free themselves from the long-term impact of trauma that creates so much suffering for so many. You don't have to focus on the details of the past to heal your trauma in the present moment. So why would anyone dredge up the past instead of focusing on what's showing up in real time and fixing the problem in the here and now? I'll tell you why. It's because until now, you didn't know what you didn't know. So with this new knowledge, there's no more worrying about being re-triggered because you're telling your story again in therapy. No more spending the rest of your week waiting for your next therapy session because you feel completely triggered after going over your story again in the last session. No more depending on someone else to help you feel in control and safe in your body. With these strategies, you don't have to dig. Instead, you watch for your triggers and tackle them in real time when they show up. Knowing exactly what to do when a trigger shows up means that you heal each trigger as it happens instead of pulling them all out at once. You deal with that particular part of your story that's interfering with the here and now without getting overwhelmed with everything else. You heal naturally at your own pace without dredging up the past. And you stay in control of your process the entire time. There's another exciting aspect that comes out of this process too. I call it the Spiderweb Analogy. Imagine triggers strung together in your brain, kind of like a spider web. The triggers in the web are represented as the connection points on the web. The healed triggers are marked with an X in this image. With this method, you separate the triggers from the surrounding real-time experiences one at a time. Once the trigger is healed, the connection is broken. Think of broken joints in the web. Then, Once you've eliminated enough triggers, some of them will disconnect automatically by association. That's like the one that's circled in the picture here. Dropping triggers that are connected to others in the web represent those aha moments, when your awareness and insight comes together in a way that allows you to see things from a different perspective, on your own. And all of it happens with you focusing on intrusions in the here and now, and not ever having to discuss the details of what happened then. Just imagine your life 3, 6, or 9 months from now, after you've disconnected your current life from triggers that used to haunt you. Imagine the relief you'll feel because you understand how to heal at deeper levels without waiting for the right therapist to be available. You will find yourself feeling confident enough to have therapy sessions less and less often. You may even graduate yourself from therapy because you know you've got this. And that feels incredible. You'll believe that your life is your own and that you can control the direction it will go, because you know how to eliminate your own triggers without sacrificing your ability to be present in the moment, in all of the moments of your life. That feels powerful, doesn't it? We'll see you for lesson number 3 tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you there.